Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the NoCode North Lodge. We're here today because Corey Moen has released the new version of Mast V2. So he's going to give us a walk down, but before we do that, I'm just going to tell you that Corey is a staff brand designer at Webflow and the co-founder of NoCode Supply Co., along with Max Lind. And Mast is a lightweight developer-first framework of essential classes and strategies to help you build efficiently for any brand and scale. And now I'm just going to say, Corey, take it away and show us what's new.
Woohoo! Thanks, y'all. Yeah, stoked to be here. Honestly, like I've been trying to, and I even said this, like tweeting some of this stuff out. I was like, I have a goal to do videos for Mast that have been asked for by many for a long time. So honestly, maybe I can show some here that I can snag some clips, or at least be like, go watch this while I figure my life out and prioritize that. So again, so grateful for y'all having me. Yeah, I can share my screen. I don't have anything super formal today. I just wanted to kind of talk through quickly, high level, what Mast is for anybody that's not familiar. Thank you for even teeing some of that up. And then get on some of the things that changed and why it's version 2 and not 1.5. And especially like maybe talk more even to the sense that there's a lot of things that changed in it that I think are more, even if you don't use Mast, they're just, maybe it's a good example to see how you can use some of these latest features in Webflow. Because I'm going to be super real with y'all. I've had a lot of temptation about just ditching Mast and using Lumos because it's so good. But I think that is in its essence, the point is that this is just one example. So anyways, let me get my screen share going. Ooh, I probably should make this a little more exclusive and not have 17 million tabs open, as I'm sure some can empathize. All right, some organization, here we go. And also, like, especially anybody in the gather, I recognize most of you, what's up? Please feel free to stop me and like just unmute and jump in. I would love for this just to be a conversation, because as most of you know, I can also talk way too much. Okay, cool. Whoa, Inception, yes, all right. Can we get a yes? We can see everything, the age old. Good. Okay, cool. Sweet. Woo, thank you. All right. Actually, let's start back here. Mast. Why Mast? So again, anybody that's here that's new, I'm sorry if you've heard this before. If you aren't new to this or already use Mast, Mast is one of several CSS frameworks for Webflow. You might, if you're even new to Webflow, be like, what? The Toot is a CSS framework. Main point is it is a way of a bunch of pre-built classes and structures and strategies in Webflow that you can just have as a great starting place to move a lot quicker for any client you have, any team you work on, that kind of thing. So even on our landing page, we have some kind of high level essence of things that we really value with Mast, especially as a priority of like what leads a lot of the decisions that happen in it. Less is more being really this idea of we could do a framework that has every possible class and thing you could ever possibly need, but then we really recognize the reality out of experience of building client sites that more often than not, you wouldn't need 60, 70% of those classes, and therefore why are they even there? And so instead we take this path of let's do the bare essentials and then have it clear that those essentials are a way to inform how you can keep adding onto it, right? I think even some interesting things we've seen out of that is other people in the community duplicating Mast and then creating their own version of it. Like shout out to Devin Fountain, who has Fount as an iteration of it. I'm stoked about that. So please also do that. Like I am 100% cool with it. If anything, just give us a shout out that like, Mast was the inspiration. But I think that's the point, is I just want to see everybody grow more at that. Another mentality here is, there's always a lot of different ways, even predating Webflow, to build a website. One of the most popular being, let's find a template or let's find a component library to work from, right? And those are great. And I think there's absolutely a case where you can use those. And it's also a very subjective personal preference thing. I have just always been the type that, if I am going to get into any hobby in life, I love to always use the example of woodworking. that I did once upon a time and not as much anymore, but I like to get in the weeds. I want to learn about wood. I want to learn about tools and why I should use this type of wood or this type of tool. I don't necessarily just want something prepackaged. And so Mast has a lot of that essence in it too. I want these fundamental building blocks that have some really clear understanding of why they exist or when and where and why I would use them. And I want to get really good and fast at using those so that I can build anything from scratch in essence, or from these base building blocks to what I need, instead of my woes of WordPress and Drupal days of long ago, where I would spend days and weeks finding the perfect theme or the perfect template or the perfect component library that then I would always feel like it's the answer, but then I would find myself spending even more time reworking and trying to understand it before I could even start creating the thing I actually needed, right? So if you think about it in those two lenses, there's some contrast, and we really take this like, let's create something versus just like copy and modify. And then the other thing here is that Mast is intended to be, we say tried and true from the sense of CSS, again, this is a CSS framework, is not, it is not simple in some sense, it is in others, but there's a lot of different things we can leverage in CSS, like units and when to use them. Like, yes, we use rem for most things, but there's absolutely a case where you're at advantage to take it, to use things like M or percentage or even pixels in times. Also, like naming things in a way that really isn't something we invented. This is practices that have been used in development for years and years and years. Something I always reference is Bootstrap. CSS is really so much of Bootstrap, especially the layout system in Mast and all that, is directly inspired by Bootstrap, just in the context of Webflow. We also take note from newer things like Tailwind here and there. But the point is, there's just a lot of this that isn't out of our brains. It's just really following the way that the industry goes. The rest of this page is all, like, what do people say, whatever. I think what's funny about this is why Mast is the previous live stream I did with y'all. So I appreciate you. Maybe this will be the replaced video here. These are also, if you ever want to see like real sites built in Mast, again, big preface here is all of these are a pre-release version of Mast. So there's a lot of things done in them that isn't going to match, especially in Mast V2, but I think there's some fundamentals that are still interesting. And the other side of these is these are all real projects, like real client work that I did in the past, my own portfolio site. And then they've just been cleaned up to be agnostic and not, no private information or whatever. The point is you can see some real context in some of those, especially like customizing things beyond just the base classes. And then, yeah, if you want to see other sites that we found in the community, people have submitted that are built with Mast, some good examples here that you can inspect in the browser and get some info as well. End rant there. Another thing to check out is docs. Again, I mentioned I really want to get into this habit as soon as possible on doing videos, especially for every section in here, because I am personally somebody that learns best from videos. I love YouTube Academy, if you will. And so I'm really trying to, work up to that, carve out the time to do that. But there's definitely some handy things to check out in here. We do have like a Figma style guide that you can start from to save some time. Also, shout out that Webflow just released the next major version of the Figma to Webflow plugin yesterday. And so I need to revisit this to make sure and make some updates to align. But that was a lot of the essence here too. And I can maybe show some of that later on, is that like this was not just there to work for now, but for me, knowing things, and that plugin is going to keep getting better. The dream state is, if you are at least controlling design in Figma before you're building Webflow, using something like this as a starting point, and then eventually being able to use the plugin to instantly sync variables and things like that over to Webflow to make getting started even faster. Yeah, otherwise, fundamentals, this is really all, again, how do we think about things? How do we name things? That kind of stuff. All the way down to styles. This is more specifically like what kind of styles are you going to find pre-built in Mast, from typography to use of color, utility classes, layout classes is like a big one, I would say, and just general structure, how we do it in Mast. Again, very inspired by boilerplate, but very tried and true. And like, as much as I've tried many other ways, I always end up coming back to this. It's so funny. And then now even one of the most exciting things I will show with Mast 2 is leveraging this exact same structure and approach with components is been really fun to play with. And then there is a new section in here that we'll get into as well that's more breaking out components, and just generally that components are now more heavily used in Webflow. And to clarify, when I say components, I mean literal Webflow components, the feature, not just the concept of a component, which is just very abstract in anything, right? So anyways, that's that. Check it out. And then lastly here, most of what I'm going to go through is this change log of the things that have been updated. So I'll pause. Any questions so far from Gather, YouTube, pass them along, Penny? Any of them? No? Cool. Crickets? All right, sick.
No, nope. There is one, but it does not necessarily right away. Would love to dig into the style guide, to the plugin, to the Webflow workflow, sort of what your approach is with all of that.
Awesome. Yeah. We will definitely do that. And now that I even say that out loud, maybe I will very quickly. I should have had this queued up. Let's get the style guide just so it's here for us. And I'm going to submit my own form because this is honestly probably faster than going and digging through Figma to find it. Okay, sick. Yep. All right, let's get into the style guide. So again, anybody that's new, unfamiliar with this, you know, any framework in Webflow starts from a base project that you can clone. So that's linked all over the docs. You'll find it like this. You can clone this. This then becomes your project that you are going to start from. You can even, you know, without cloning it, open it in Webflow, see what's up. And so the idea is, you know, you land here. This is your homepage. Honestly, you're probably just going to delete this because this will become the homepage of your actual site. But then in the meat of the framework itself, we have 2 pages that we can check out, right? And so first one is styles. So again, how are we handling classes and styling for all types of things as it's outlined in the docs, typography, color, layout, etc. And then the new page for Mast 2.0 is components, right? We had some of this on styles before, like buttons and really common things you see. The point of this being its own page is there's just more here, right? So we'll get back to that in a sec. And then the other 2 new additions you'll find in the page panel is static page templates, right? So what these are is, I tried to name clearly, I went back and forth, should this be dev mode? Because I mean, spicy take, Webflow, but we ain't designing in here, we're developing, here nor there. And then build mode, the point is that if you need to just new scratch page to start from, these make that way faster and quicker to do. So again, we will come back to those. I just wanted to kind of go through these pages, talk about some of the things that changed. And so first thing here, typography, nothing major here, aside from maybe this being a start comment on a blanket take that I thought about a lot with Mast 2.0 is we were very intentionally opinionated with the earlier version of Mast in many ways. And I've tried to start softening some of those opinions simply out of just the reality that, you know, there is edge cases that it's still good to have pre-baked because they are common enough, or just they're there and we don't want to make extra work for somebody if it's not needed, right? And so the first one was the earlier version of Mast only had H1 through 4. I am a believer in the design system thinking of less options is far better. When it comes to type, color, anything, when you have too many options, you can quickly get into, you know, option paralysis of like not knowing what to use when, and it actually hurts your design versus having a little bit more constraints and ways. And so we previously only had 1 through 4. We now have 5 and 6, just because let's be real, there is a lot of us using Mast or just getting designs from somebody else, and they are already going to have those in there. And so let's just make it easier to do that. And so another thing here, while we're going through here, I'm going to kind of keep coming back to variables as a essential part of this. Again, hopefully most frameworks, like I mentioned, Lumos, I don't know, eventually client first will have more variables, hopefully, especially now that we have modes. But variables in Webflow is now so much more powerful and just going to keep getting more powerful and integrated, ultimately just to save us time and help us work much faster, right? And so the last version of Mast had variables, but it was just one major bucket. There wasn't this concept of collections. And so that was fine, but it was really hard to find stuff. And now we have collections, right? So typography, while we're on this, I can go to that collection. If I'm setting up a new project, I can quickly see, all right, what's the fonts I'm using for every different heading size and paragraph size? What are the base parameters that don't change, like line height, font weight, things like that. And when I say don't change, I mean they don't change across breakpoints, right? As the site gets smaller, bigger responsively. And so those are all here, right? And then on the responsive front, the common thing that does change is font size, right? And you could do also still things like fluid type in here. That is another video I want to do on how you could do that with Mast. It's really shouldn't be that hard to do. It's just not something that I believe belongs out of the box, because that's maybe more complex to understand for some, or just arguably not as browser reliable if you really were going back in support. And so either way, you can adjust all the font size across headings right here quickly out of the box. And even in that essence, a lot of the last version of Mast and this one, having variables at the center makes it so that initial project setup is immensely faster than it used to be before variables, where you have to basically scroll through and update every single class individually, even for cases like this where you have matching styles between an H1 element and an H1 class, right? Like, it was just a lot of work, and that is all so much faster now because you can just quickly update those all right in here, and they are reflected everywhere because they're already bound to classes and styles for you. Again, the plug here is that the dream state is that you'll actually set up all of these exact same variables in Figma in the style guide first, and then use the Figma Webflow plugin to then just sync those over to Webflow. Again, big preface, I have not revisited this yet. I have not played enough with the new plugin or the new version of the plugin to know if that will work right now. Because especially I'm guessing a lot of things like nomenclature and how we name these is going to matter a lot to make sure it's consistent. So here nor there, that's the thinking. Again, please pop in if anybody has questions. Continuing on, another thing that changed that I kind of, before tried to be really intentional about, if we're naming stuff, how can we be as consistent as humanly possible? And so before, our paragraph sizes were named paragraph dash a number. So like 1.25, 2.9, whatever. And that was out of the thinking of, well, if we're using numbers to establish headings, let's do the same here, and let's do the same with spacing utilities. But I'm going to be real, like, as much as I've used that way for a long time, the thing that is annoying is that when you hop from one client project to the next, these values are always likely different. But I don't want to have to think different when I'm adding a large paragraph in one client's site versus another. And so, the t-shirt sizing nomenclature of XL, LG, SM is so hyper common that I just gave up on that one and admitted that this is definitely probably better. The one other hangup I had before was not wanting to confuse the use of these between breakpoints or sizes of things. And the one way that I balance that is, like, if I was to look at, we'll get to the layout stuff, but if I was to look at how we set classes to control columns, they also have LGSM. However, the difference is these are, I think it's called infix, where, that is noted within the middle of the class name, not at the end. And so that was the thinking that, to me, again, maybe some of you won't even care about that difference. I just like to go really deep on the essence of some of this. And so the way I, sleep at night is that, hey, these are denoted at the end. And so if it's at the end, that means it's defining a size, not a breakpoint. And so you'll see that reflected later on in some of these. Again, all these sizing can be controlled directly from the type stuff here for fonts and all that. And then responsiveness can be controlled here. And then as well, if you need other sizes, the idea is you can always just, I guess we don't have a duplicate function yet. You could always just create a new variable of like paragraph XXL, right? And follow the same pattern. Same thing in here. I could go in and just follow this exact same methodology and have paragraph XXL with all these variables, set the fonts, set the weight, all that kind of stuff. Quickly, one other thing here that was mostly just a thank you, finally, upgrade was font weight, line height. In the previous version, Webflow didn't support a unit list or number variable type. They do now. So before, we had this kind of font weight hack that came straight up from the Lord himself, Timothy Ricks. And then line height was set with M's because ultimately it's equivalent. but I just think it's cleaner having unit lists. So all font weights and line heights are now native unit lists and bound as such. So again, we're just cleaner, squeaky clean. I like squeaky clean. Moving on, color, no huge changes here other than we now have modes. And so colors are bound into variable modes, which is super exciting. And so you'll see that there are some actual utility classes now that I can control modes. I'll show that in a sec, but those are all associated up here in the theme collection. I would love feedback on this because I went back and forth a lot around like, well, should this be called modes instead of theme? But like it is more of a theme, and then these are the modes. So like, again, maybe way too in the weeds, but this is the stuff I like to nerd out about. And so in here in general, you can see that out of the box, just like I said earlier, Mast is intentionally simple. You can then extend way beyond this for each project, but not every project will need it. So we don't want to go too hard out of the box. And so out of the box, you get background, text color, and then a primary accent color. And then you can adjust those across modes. So the thinking being, if your base mode is a dark style site, then you probably want a dark color set as the background and a light color set as the foreground. And then maybe you want to invert that. So instead of calling this light mode, you know, it's called invert because we don't know out of the box if you want this to be light or dark. So this is just the inverse of that. And then a lot of projects might not even need these accent ones, but I just wanted to show them as the example of other ways you could extend this. And so these are all bound up to these utility class, and then they're also used in components, as you will see in the page builder stuff in a sec. But the idea is I could throw on, you know, U mode invert here, and then instantly this whole section will consume that background text color and primary accent color and anything else you add. Before this, you would have had to do BG black, text white. Oh, sorry, I'm doing the inverse here. You know, UBG white, and then text black, right? And it's just a little bit more work. And the other side of this too is like this global project consistency, right? Mast is intended to be used for a single landing page all the way up to it is currently being used on numerous enterprise Webflow sites. So big sites. And so we will always want to think about like, how can we have that global control across as many things we can, whether it's through classes, variables, components. There's a lot of different ways to have global control as a concept. Modes is just one other way to have that, right? Moving on, chicken time. Okay, cool. I definitely want to leave some time for like general open questions here, so I'll try to keep going with some pace. Other changes here, utility classes. I already prefaced this. Used to be UMT1, UMT2, UMT3. We switched these to also being t-shirt size basis. So that way, if you do have a project that uses M out of the box, which is what we recommend, great. However, if you have a project with a design that is very explicit, that it should only ever be 20 pixels, 40 pixels, and 60 pixels spacing, sick. You can update that. And if you go in here again and go to layout this time, then you will find that there is the base spacing utilities here set in those M's. So really fast, you can switch these to being rem based. You don't need to change class names, anything else. If you're more comfortable working in rems, pixels, etc., do that. It's right here and much simpler. Another thing you'll notice in this version compared to the previous is it's only margin utilities. This is maybe contrary to what I said about being less opinionated, is that like the more Mast sites I saw, and then in my own workflow, I almost never used the padding ones except for these, where I'm using padding to zero out the top or bottom padding of a section that has padding by default, or maybe removing all the padding on like a card body or something like that. So I just kind of made that call of like, let's just stick to the margin. That is our recommended approach. That's what I see people using the most. So that's what we did. Again, if you didn't agree with that, you could very easily add in all the padding ones that just match the same approach and thinking, right? Some other things here, alignment mostly stayed the same. We also saw a lot of people using clamp. I was also using clamp more and more. So we added utilities to do that. Some of the code for this is also in this global designer embed, which this is pretty common across most frameworks anymore, but just know that this needs to be on every page for certain utilities and functions to properly work like this. Like you can see if I delete it, that doesn't work anymore. So anyways, I was going to do that too. I've been playing with this new, you know, the little like show my keystroke functions. I don't know. Of course, it's not in the right position though. Wait, how do I put it at the bottom? Sorry, 1 second. Large. Okay, sick. Now maybe we can see my things if I go back and hit delete. Yay! Hope you can see the keystrokes I'm doing. Cool. Overflow is all the same. Display utilities did get some updates, mostly just in responsive modifiers. So this being it's not uncommon, though I almost never recommend doing this if you can help it. But there's cases where you want to show one element on desktop and tablet and then hide it on mobile, both mobile sizes, and then inversely do the same with a different element. You can do that now natively with these utilities, whereas before you would have either had to add them or do it with a custom class. Aspect ratio, I think we did add a couple here. Sorry, there's a lot, so I'm trying to remember all of them. Helpers didn't change. And then layout. Again, if you're ever wondering like, well, you know, how does this work? The entire style guide and all that is built with the same row and column system as a great example. Otherwise, again, look at those sample sites on the landing page. The only main thing that changed with these was something else we heard a lot of feedback on. And again, selfishly, I had more and more use cases for, and that is different gaps. So now out of the box, what it was before is when you set up rows and columns, by default, they had one gap. And that was whatever you set in the variable right here that is also in this layout collection. Now you have 3 different sizes. And a major part of this is not only preference, because you might have one section versus the next that wants looser or tighter gap, but the other thinking in this is using it for smaller UI, right? And an example of this is some other frameworks and even like Devon's and Fount, you know, will have a whole gamut of display flex utilities, right? Which is all, I've done this as well. So to be clear, like this is a little bit of an experiment, but I really think I'm going to enjoy building with this better. And so instead of having like 30 deflex classes that you have to combine to say like udflex, and then the next one's like, you know, center or bottom center, and then, you know, like all those combinations that can get really stringed, and then also is just like a very different approach than doing bigger layouts with rows and columns. In this case, now we could do small little UI, and I'll show this in the page builder components, by just shrinking the gap and then still having all the same alignment and positioning controls that you get with the bigger layouts, right? So in my brain, it's just we're working more consistently, and it's much less to memorize and move quickly when you're building. And so all you have to do is just tack on these extra row utilities to adjust those gaps based on your preference and based on what you set in the variables, right? So very modular from one project to the next. Moving on, components. This is the fun part. So some things like buttons before were not components. I had some opinions about that here and there. They are now components. They are so common, and there absolutely is still going to be some cases where you can't use them, to be fair. For example, in a form to this point is still, we're just rolling with a static button. Again, would love feedback on this. I think there's absolutely a world where we could give you a prop in here that lets you switch this between an A HTML element and a actual button HTML element, because I think if you make an actual button and put it inside a form, it will act as the submit. But there's those nuances that like it's yeah, taking it one thing at a time. And so some of the benefits of this is, you know, we can also then start using these in page builder components. You can do things and more easily make global updates. Like if all of a sudden you need some other element in here on every button across your site, it's a component, so you can update it one place, it updates everywhere. We can more easily mix in other components that we have now, like icons. So you can see even the icon in here is now associated to the new icon component, which is by default a now CSS-based icon library. These have been around forever. I'll get into this in a sec, but it does make using icon systems much, much faster for the developer if your client and use case is open to using a pre-existing library like that versus completely scratch icons that require raw SVGs or images, right? And so you'd have to modify this approach if you wanted to do that. But here or there, that is there. Forms mostly stay the same. And then we get into some of the other new components in here. And a lot of these out of this essence that like, again, Mast has always been the most amount of nothing, the pure bare essentials of, you know, in the wood example, it is your chop, is your axe and your, you know, hand saw. You need nothing else and you could build a world with that. And me coming to terms with the reality that I think every site I've built in the last 5 years has had an accordion. Most of them have a modal. Eyebrows and icons and some of these other things we've added. And then there's also parts of these that like, just for accessibility reasons, I was sick of rebuilding. And so things like the accordion component, for example, the trigger element is a proper button. And it has some at least base accessibility things. I will fully admit, you could take this one step further in terms of accessibility by adding a little bit more JavaScript that toggles the open and close state. But for me, that is just one more thing that somebody would have to understand to use this successfully. So we're going to tiptoe into that and start without, and at least have some other benefits like giving a unique ID, setting it up so that it's within a list element. This should all be noted in the docs for what it's worth, and things like that. Modal is the same story. Again, funny because it's another case where this is not the button component because it needs to be an actual button for accessibility reasons. So now that I say this, it's like maybe it should just, I don't know, here or there. It's a start. The button component is now using the native HTML dialog element. What I love so much about this is if I go ahead and publish this and look at this on the live page, HTML and CSS are constantly getting advancements. I know that this is mostly a group of Webflowers already, so I'm preaching to the choir, but this is one of the core reasons I love Webflow so dearly is that it is just using HTML and CSS, folks. So as all of those advancements keep coming in browser native HTML and CSS, we get them for free in Webflow, even if it's like using an embed or a custom element to get there. And this is one of those examples. So what I mean by accessibility benefits is if I tab into this and hit enter, then I can tab around this modal and it traps my focus. Previously, you'd have to do this with a decent amount of JavaScript and it gets complex once you have multiple on a page. We get this for free with the native HTML dialog. And then like I can hit escape to close it. That also comes for free. There is, to be clear though, there is a little bit of JavaScript that still comes with this. I believe that we have that in the project settings though. So you shouldn't have to touch it as long as you kind of follow this methodology. And it's working off relationship. So it doesn't matter how many you have on the page. It will work for all instances. And again, it's not a ton of JavaScript. The main thing this is doing is triggering the open and close through the attribute. And then if you click outside of the core dialog, it will close it as well, which is not yet native in HTML dialog, but I wouldn't be surprised is coming in the near future. Other things in here, eyebrow, pretty straightforward. This is mostly here so we can use it in the page builder stuff. Breadcrumbs is another great one that shout out to Mike on my team at Webflow, who actually is the one that built this for us on the brand team at Webflow. And for the most part, I see this all the time. People build breadcrumbs that just aren't as optimized as they could for both A, accessibility, and B, SEO. For example, having the item prop and position and then content number set in the breadcrumb. You could do this not outside of the component like in custom code, but Mike actually found this really clever way to do it just right here with custom elements. And so Google will fully understand this as it expects to do. And so love this one. Icon that I already mentioned with the button. Shout out to James Levine at Outseta, who shared a Webflow clonable for his approach on this. Also, Timothy Ricks has a great YouTube video to look up on doing this exact same approach with buttons. If you had different sizes of buttons, you could do this as well. And so long story short, this is a couple components nested to make it so that you can have a couple layers of variance. So you can have like multiple sizes. And again, the note is that this is just out of the box. You could add more sizes. You can also do things like M is one addition I made that I thought is handy. So that way, if you have this wrapped around a H1, it will now consume the font size of its parent if you have it set at that 1M, which is really handy in some cases, right? And then again, these are CSS based. If you aren't familiar, check out the docs. The general point is this one uses Phosphor. But you could swap this for Font Awesome, any other ones, and you can just go into the global CSS element, or sorry, global custom code element here, replace this URL, for example, with the CSS file for Font Awesome, for Google Material, etc. Any icon library that can run off of class sets. So like, for example, Font Awesome, you would change this to FA space FA dash whatever. But, you know, I can change this to gear. I can change this to flag. I can change this to whatever those keywords are for that system. And I can swap icons super, super, super fast, right? Again, it's funny because like I use these pre-Webflow days and I really haven't as much since, mostly because most of the projects I have worked on either have custom icons or I just like to experiment with other ways to do it. And I think I'm just coming back to terms that this is really easy, especially for people that have a client or that isn't as opinionated on it needing to be one or another. Or again, maybe they're already using Font Awesome or Phosphor out of the box, so this just makes it easier. Moving on, cards the same, rich text pretty much the same. And then the last couple ones here is the bigger ones as well. So nav and footer and nav banner. Again, every site has these for the most part. I got sick of rebuilding them all the time, especially as, you know, I'm sure many of us have felt with navs. And then again, inspired by Timothy Ricks sharing more Lumos ones out of the box. And then, you know, people that have been using Reloom, Epic, do it. There's so much time to be saved just by like the nuances of things like a nav. And so I at least wanted to have this in here as a starting point. Again, we intentionally don't show you 17 options of navs because the thinking is that in the way that Mast is developer first, right? It's that like you can see this and be like, oh, sick. Like I can, sorry, I just wanted to really make the point of developer first. I can hop in here and know that like, okay, I can make a sense of the structure. And like, cool, we have like a container here and then the nav menu and like we have a button. Okay, so like maybe if I wanted to make this like centered, I could just do that, right? I don't need to have a whole other option to do it. So that's the thinking, is that like it is those fundamentals. It also has some a little bit of code in some embeds here that will handle things like the skip link for you, and the CSS doing things like locking body scroll when the mobile nav is open. Stuff like that, you know, really you should be doing every time anyways, and hopefully just saves you a little bit of time in getting there. It also handles things like, again, focus states, making sure that everything is accessible in that regard. And then even like responsively, the CTA button is separate from the menu so that you can really keep that up and apparent all the time. But if you didn't want that, cool, put the CTA in the menu and it'll go right in there, no problem, right? So things like that. The footer is actually nothing special at all. It's simply to be there as a starting point. It is just a section with a combo class on it if you want to adjust padding and all that, and then some pre-built things just to show how you'd set up icons for social or LOL, do I not actually have the footer year in here? All right, found a bug. That would be handy to be there. But otherwise you can see that like the structure, y'all, it's still just rows and columns. It's all the same stuff we use everywhere. So there's a billion different ways to do footers. You know, if you're ever wondering what, how, check out again, shout out to Devin and Benton and them, footer.design. Oh my gosh, if we tried to anticipate all these footers, there's no world Mast would ever get done. So this is just a starting point. All right, conscious of time, last home stretch here, build mode. Yo, this is like, it's been in the works forever. You know, Webflow announced a lot of this around Webflow Conf this past fall. And I'm going to be real with you. I didn't use it a ton until getting into this. And I've also at the same time been watching on the sidelines, waiting to see how other people are using it. And one of the big things that I was really struggling with finding a balance between, hold on, is this, how complex do you make it or how simplified do you make it? Do I use slots a lot? Do I use props a lot? Again, I'm sorry if you're not familiar with those terms. Just Google that, Webflow component slots, Webflow component props. I will show some of these in practicality. But long story short, where we landed with this is you can see kind of the base level of them here. It's essentially, this looks like 3 components. It's technically 4. I just thought it was easier to show it this way. You have a section You have a grid, which is really just rows and columns. That is the exact same thinking and approach and classes as doing it statically, like you see up here. And then you have content, and content is just rich text. And I love rich text because rich text is so flexible. I can add bullets, and I can add headings, and I can add links, and I can add images, and I can add embeds. And this means I don't need separate components for all of them. That is crazy. And so we can work much more simply, but still have quite a bit of flexibility with this. And again, I'm sorry if I sound like I'm repeating myself a lot. This is meant to inspire you as I start and help you get on a path that you can extend it for your specific project's case, because there's always going to be custom components and things needed. And even after I say this out loud, something else I was going to show is like we are in the process of using the same thinking for webflow.com for my day gig at Webflow, and just kind of showing some of how we're using that. Shout out to Skylar Kitchen on my team as well. Many of you probably seen or know him from the community. He's built out all this and really extended this to the point that like we can do whole feature pages with it, which is pretty rad. And so really where you see this come to life is these static page templates. Just to quickly reiterate, the point here of these for design mode is if I am in design mode and I need a new page, instead of like the old way, at least for me, was I would always go find another page and duplicate it. So I had the nav and the structure all in there. I've seen other people have like, you know, a component that is like a page starter component that you drag into a blank page and then unlink it. I think that approach is rad too. The point of static page templates though is for a native solution to that. So I can say, I want a new page and we'll just leave it as untitled, hit create. And then here is just my navs in here, the structure with page wrappers all here, and we're ready to go. I heard a unmute. Question? Maybe? No? Accident? Okay, cool. I'll keep going. And so again, this is here. I could quickly get going, add my heading, add my stuff, add my rows and columns. As a dev, I like starting this way. But if I put myself in build mode, boom. So again, another little context setting here is that Webflow to date, there's, you know, one of the major benefits of it is, you know, as a designer developer, I could build what I wanted here. And then my key collaborators, marketers, website owners, they could hop in through the old legacy Webflow editor to basically see the live site and then click on text and live edit it. Which is great. I still love it, but that is being deprecated. So if you haven't already started thinking about this, start thinking about talking to your clients, your team, whatever it is, to start getting used to using build mode, or there's actually another one here called edit mode, because that editor, legacy editor, will be going away. And what's amazing about build and edit mode is essentially the same thing edit was. You can edit live text, manage the CMS, access images, and you get some more benefits though, especially like the asset panel that you didn't get in the editor. And then build mode is one layer between design and edit, if you will. And that layer is components. So you can see the static page that I created. Cool, I can create some or edit some text here or whatever, but I can't like really move much else. I guess I can select the nav. I can do some things like, you know, modify it, change its color, that kind of stuff, but I want to like build onto this page. There's not really much I can do here. And so that is where build mode comes in, and a build mode template, right? So I can go to the build mode template and at least see what's here. And all of these sections are meant to not be like, you should use these. These are just purely simple examples that are all built with the exact same 4 components that I walked through: content, grid, column and row, and section, plus the ones we're using everywhere else on our site, like eyebrow, icon, footer nav, button, accordion, etc. You're just combining these all in the same way you use on a static page as you would in build mode. But in here, I can actually build pages, right? And so if I'm in build mode and I'm a marketer, I can say, sweet, I want a new page, add lander, I don't know, something cool. I can go create. And again, there is no style panel, nothing. I could be like, you know, I do kind of like the centered hero. I'm going to delete these 2. And then I probably need a feature section. I kind of like this one, so I'm going to delete this one. But I really want this to be like dark, so I can swap to dark. And then I like this one too, you know, but maybe I don't want to go like too dark at a time. So maybe I'll use like this like dark accent one. And then, you know, any good lander has a CTA section like this, maybe. So like, let's go white. And then maybe I'll end with a FAQ, because again, what good lander doesn't answer every question you've ever had? So quickly, you know, especially if you think of this from the lens that you've actually set up this project and built out even more options for them, especially if I show the Webflow one, instead of just having them all on the build mode template, we actually have a few draft pages in here that the client can look through, our teammate can look through, and then you can copy paste sections from one page to another, or components from one page to another while in build mode. And then into the weeds more of build mode components and why maybe they're different than some would approach. And the main high level way of thinking here is that, like, one way you could approach components is I have all these pre-built sections or components, and if I want to change the heading, or if I want to change the text, or if I want to change the icon, everything has to be bound to a prop, right? Which you can see an example of this with the button, right? Like lots of props. And that is fine, but it can get very, very, very lengthy and complex and intimidating for a collaborator that isn't a developer to get in here and be like, I don't know what I'm looking at. I don't know how to start. Especially, like, I wish there was a toggle so that these groups could be closed by default. Good feature request. But yeah, it's just complex. And so instead, the way we are thinking about this is like, what if the default is just the structure? And if you want content, you just do it through rich text, right? And so I can add things. I can even use Markdown in here, thankfully now, in rich text. I can add images. I can add all the stuff I mentioned earlier. I can do it in the canvas, which is usually the most obvious or intuitive thing. Like, I'm just trying to build a page. I want to click and edit just like it's a Google Doc or something, right? And then the other side of this is the structure, where, like, I would never expect a client to get in here and build one of these from scratch. However, they might use it enough eventually that they could, where they're going to, you know, drag in a section. Can I get it in the right spot here? Maybe. Did I get it? Did I not? No, maybe not. This is always the fun part. We can also use search, right? So I could add a section, and then I could go in here and I can add a row, right? And then in the row, I can add a column. If I could type, I can't type. And then in the column, I can add some content, right? Like, I could do it this way, but the thinking is, like, they shouldn't have to. Their primary mode of using this, or even you of using this to move quickly, is I'm just grabbing stuff off the shelf, copy pasting and modifying. And where I'm getting at with this is modifying is the key. I don't know about y'all, but I often operate from a place of all the jaded experiences I've had with clients and projects, and, you know, and constantly, it sounds savage, but a little bit haunted by some of these things. And so I always think about, like, this is cool, but what if the client needs 6 items here, not 4? And so this is where this is all inspired, is that it's all components in slots, meaning I can copy paste all of this and I can have 8. Or I can be like, oh, actually, I want this to be like narrower. Or, you know, I decided instead, I think I want these things stacked. So, like, maybe I'll have like this full, or I guess shrink. Again, did I break this? Am I crazy? Okay, we can go this route. I want this to be stacked on top of each other instead. And so, like, maybe I could go up to the row and actually say, like, I want these like top center. And then I want this like to be centered. And again, look at that, like, probably should actually fix this. So we'll delete that for now. Nothing's perfect. And then now, you know, maybe I want all these to be wider. Wait, we have a parent column here. Cool. Yeah. So I want this to be like, let's go even full. Yo, why is my full not working as I expect? Again, bug smashing at the middle of a live stream. I love it. You get the point, right? And then I could adjust all of these down to this concept that, like, admittedly, a client might be like, what does 4 out of 12 mean? But you use it once, you use it twice, this stuff's going to start becoming more and more second nature, because there's ultimately not that much to learn here compared to trying to, you know, go the way of, even like, if we talk about like client first, just as a comparison, the essence of client first was in the theory that they could learn how to do all this type of stuff in the designer with the full style panel and classes. And I'm sorry, y'all. We work with a lot of clients. That's just so hard, no matter how technical they are or not. This is much less to learn, right? And they could do something like this, modify the section if they really wanted to, and then have other things like responsiveness handled out of the box, because we can make some assumptions that, small columns should shift to 6 by 6 at some point and then full width at another. And so all this is just kind of thought through out of the box. Again, icons are using the same icon component. So you can give them a little instruction here. They're like, hey, so-and-so client, go to phosphoricons.com if you don't know what icon you want. And you can come here and say, I want a car, because I love cars. Oh my gosh, is there not a car? Oh my gosh, what? Is there a wrench? Oh, look at that, wrench. And look, it just says wrench. And why am I drawing a blank on? I thought it showed the CSS name directly here. Oh wait, maybe is it? Yeah, there we go. Web. So look, PH wrench. Okay, that makes sense. So that means I can just replace this last one with wrench, and boom, there's my wrench. I decided I want these smaller and maybe yellow or blue. Again, you get the point. Knowing we were almost at the hour and I've just barreled through all that, I really want to pause and hopefully y'all have some questions. So I'll stop there. Thank you for bearing with me.
Great. Thank you, Corey. My goodness, that is a lot to cover in a short period of time. You're quite, yeah. All right, so we do have a few comments. Eric Odom has said he loves the text balance feature, and he doesn't have to build that now, and really like the accessibility features that you've put in. Mm-hmm. Corey Reynolds has a question about, Corey, do you want to jump in and ask? It's about
Corey, flow man.
Sure. So I don't know if you guys have seen the Timothy Ricks has this new kind of like Flexbox variable setup system that it's working in his, I guess it's not even really in his Lumo system. It's just this, he has got a YouTube video on it. And I was trying to like adapt it and bring it into Mast. Wasn't quite getting it working, but I don't know if that's just because how Mast was built, or if that's something that we could be able to add. I find like a lot of projects, like I just need more control over different types of Flexbox layouts, but I don't want to make custom classes over and over again. So being able to add like another little system inside of it.
Yeah. So I have seen this, and I think the way, correct me if I'm wrong, he is leveraging this is with variable modes, to basically use modes as a means to toggle things, right? So if I go back to our static page example here, in the same way that I could add the U mode stuff, right? All that's doing is actually changing the mode here, right? So he's adding another layer of like flex as a mode. Absolutely, I don't see any reason you couldn't build that in a Mast. My opinionated opinion of this is this is where I start to struggle to wrap my head around the idea of like, there is absolutely a world where you could use modes for everything. But to me, like I try to be very vanilla, I guess is one way to express it, in thinking about when I think of modes, especially like trying to draw back to getting into this space. Yeah, light and dark mode for sure. Like that, you're going to come across that very quickly. And so using modes for color for me makes a lot of sense. Using modes for responsiveness for me makes a lot of sense. Using it for something like Flexbox and layout is where I start to struggle with the practicality of that, simply because where does it stop, right? Like if I'm using modes for simple layout and things like that, does that mean I should use modes for like everything? I mean, and to be fair, even like Lumos is using modes to set headings, right? So like instead of having pre-baked where I just add an H1 like this and you don't have to do anything else, it's styled. Instead, if you add an H1, it is completely unstyled. So you need an extra CSS to unstyle it, and then you need more CSS to restyle it and do it via modes. And on one hand, the advantage is you can bind modes to components, which is probably where he's going with this. And to be also abundantly clear, if I haven't already, big fan of Timothy. And so I'm saying all this out of love and grace and simply my opinion on different ways I think we can think about this. What was I was just about, I was going to just show, if we go back here, just going in and modifying or editing this component, you can see what I mean by this, where I can have variants of any component. And in that variant, I can change any class and it will affect this element and all of its children. I can also change the mode, right? And so this is super interesting that you can bind in a way, right? Or you can toggle these variants, these modes within variants of a component. So if you were going to go the path, especially of like every heading is a component instead of using rich text, or you have like maybe an open-ended, to your point, Corey, like a div that is just an open box slot component that has that flex box mode. So then you can adjust all that flex. That totally would also be a good reason to do it there. I think I'm not there yet on seeing the use case. However, I would love to see it in practice. You know what I mean? Like if you do end up building into a site and using it, I am all ears to see it that way. And I think the other thing I didn't mention that is semi-related to this is that point of a small UI. And I love, Corey, that you call it too, like sick of using custom classes for all those things. Like a lot of projects for buttons like this, I always would have like a div that was like button wrapper or button group or something like that. That would be, you know, setting a gap in here. And I wanted to entertain this idea of, instead, if I go back here and I have a button component and now I need 2 buttons, if I want to space them, you know, again, with that mode approach, I would still need a wrapper and instead of mode, and that mode would need to be bound to a class, which, like, to me, is that any different than just using combo classes? And again, you're just adding code to do it, versus like there's also this world now where I could just say I want this to be a row and then gap of SM, and then I want this to be call and call shrink, which again, what's funny is like the workflow here is like it's probably slower to be super clear, but I am reusing still all the same essence of what is in the rest of my site. And then I'm like, that's too narrow. I'm going to do gap medium if I could type. And then now this is my lockup. If I want to do center, right, I can do row, justify, center, and then now they're centered. Right, so it's using the same mentality and strategy as the rest of layouts. And so this is where I want to see how it goes, maybe is a better way to put it. And then I'll stop there. So if there's other questions, yeah, hopefully that's helpful.
All right, cool.
Cool.
We actually have Jeremy's put his hand up, but we also have a question that John had asked before about color naming. John, do you want to jump in there? John Saxton?
Yeah, on some of the component props, I think it was specifically for icons that are using the yellow and blue variants that come out of the box. I think my only feedback there is that they are the default names of the variables being yellow and blue. Obviously easy to swap out in the variable panel, but then you also have to swap it out in the component prop anytime that's used. And I think that's used somewhere else as well. I might prefer something like more agnostic for that. You know what I mean?
Dude, such good feedback, and totally generally agree. This was one that I definitely remember on, like, especially this sense of, I was like, should the accent color, for example, of this be yellow and then this be blue? In some projects, 100,000% that would be the case, but in others not. And this is where I always feel a little stuck between making the most generic call there. And so in this case, like, again, I would love to see, like, as you get into using this, like any examples in practice to inform this, because I think that's where I get hung up, is like, not every site has multiple accent colors that are, for example, primary, secondary, tertiary. Some sites are literally like, oh, we have, for example, Webflow's own branding used to be any CMS style thing is purple, any interactions thing is orange. And, you know, a lot of the reason for that was even just because, like, you add a collection list and it's purple, right? And so, like, that is, I guess, where I got stuck on this, to be super real with you, and landed into, let's just call them a color. Because I think the other thought I had with this was like, let's not even have colors. Like, let's just assume that it's always going to be the color of the thing. For example, if I leave it as inherit and wrap this in a div and do text color uText black, it's black, you know? So like, that's a different way you could handle this, or uText primary is now primary. And so I think that's where I got stuck. Sorry, I hope that doesn't sound like an excuse.
That makes sense.
Yeah. That's where I went. And then to your point, just even for others, like once you set this up, if you want your own, you would just go in and edit the icon color with all the variants here. So you can add variants, change variants, rename the variants. And then in this case, I'm just binding them directly to the raw color variable instead of up here in the theme. But I 100% could see the world where even, let's just like maybe just do this quick. Like if this is primary accent, instead of doing it in this way in the modes, I could say secondary accent and tertiary accent, right? And then let's bind these to blue and yellow. And then come back here and modify this. So instead, this would be primary. It's funny, I think I did the wrong order, but I'll switch it. And then this would be secondary, right? This is kind of what you're saying. Am I right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yep. And then, so then in secondary, instead of binding it directly to the yellow, I'm going to come up here and go to this. And then in tertiary, I'm going to go up here and go to this, right? And then, so now, as you can see, it's still pretty quick to modify, but you can extend and adjust this for your use case. Yeah, great question.
Cool. Thanks.
Yeah.
Great. Jeremy, you've got your hand up.
Yep. Totally. Oh, yes. Yep. Totally. Yes, 100%. Fantastic question. So a couple things I can respond to with that. One, in this essence of like, I couldn't agree more with how deep super atomic with components, right? And this is what I meant, especially in the example of like, I'm going to have a component for headings. I'm going to have a component for text. I'm going to have a component instead of using something like rich text. Like it can get so complex so fast that like this is for me at the forefront of a lot of this approach. And then to that same essence of even what you were saying with the client's context, so like, I just want to copy paste or grab something and then tweak it and then move. And that is exactly where at least I was thinking with some of this, is that ironically, there's some strategy, if you will, with this that follows what Mast has always done. And a good example that has always been a contentious point in development long before Webflow is, should headings be pre-styled, especially with margins, right? And Mast has always taken this example of like, yes, they are, because like I said, I can just add a paragraph and I don't have to think about what size of bottom margin that I use on all my H2s. And then at the same time, if I want to remove it, it is I forget now how we call it in the docs, but it is always this mentality of start what I need and remove what I don't. And the components are the exact same thinking, right? So the client might be like, I don't know, if I go back to my ad lander here, I don't know why I would even need an eyebrow. I don't know what an eyebrow is. This isn't a face. So I can just click it and delete it. That is as easy as it is. And that's an intuitive concept UX wise that we use in app and software every single day. And so that is the same thinking here is kind of like I said, I would, especially saying this from the lens of y'all as developers working with clients and teams, I would, if you're going to use this approach, I would never pitch it and introduce them to it as they need to learn how to build all these sections from scratch, because they're also not a designer or developer. They don't think in layout, right? Instead, they think in like, show me some examples and I'll pick what I like, right? So that's why you build out this library. They copy paste what they want, they delete what they don't need, right? And so even to the extent that like, part of me was like, every single section you build could have eyebrow, 2 buttons, all that kind of stuff out of the box, just so that there's more for them to delete or know that you could do, and then remove if they don't need it. I'll quickly show this because I said I would. This is the Webflow one we're building. So, very sneak peek here. But in essence, this is what I was talking about, where we do still have this base template, but Skylar has already started building out all of these example sections that aren't that extensive yet. But some of them, most of them are the same exact structure of column sizes, rows, columns, again, so that we can very quickly extend to however many of something we need. There's like a card component in here as well. So we are going a little further with some of that. And again, you could do this with the same thinking in Mast. We just don't want to go that far out of the box. And then there's stuff like this, that we have this sticky scroll component. If you've been on any webflow.com marketing feature page, you've probably seen this. And in this one, it is specific enough that we aren't using this layout approach. It is all props. And I wanted to show this too, just from the contrast of like, there's no reason you still couldn't do this. This is why everything isn't built this way though, because like, look at this, like, this is, if I am a client, this is like scary. And again, if we could somehow, hopefully one day default it to this, it'll be better. Okay. So I just want to show that as an example. And then the last thing on CMS, absolutely, I can throw in a collection list. I can put this, any component in the collection list, and I can bind rich text. I can bind links. I can bind all kinds of stuff. I don't remember yet if variants are bindable. Give it, I'm sure, a few days and Tim will have a workaround for it. The point is, yes, you can use these, and I would expect you to intermix these into collections. And then I would also expect that this is still something that, like, even at Webflow Conf, the team at Webflow is very aware of this value in intermixing CMS and components. And so we should see more and more and more ways that these things are intermixed. And then even to the point you made as well, that's kind of similar to this around this, like, this might be candidly a little intimidating. And what I hope will come is more, field types, right? Like Timothy Ricks, again, my gosh, how much we talk about him. Big love, Tim. His Chrome extension, you can preset values in here. So it'll you can click it and it'll set this for you. Imagine a world where we just have a way to set a prop field type, just like you can set an option field in the CMS, where I could preset maybe 30 of these that we're going to use most often. And all they're going to see here is a drop down with simple language of star, gear, flag. They don't even need to know how to type this, because for each option, you could set what the value is that should be set for, in this case, the CSS. And then you can also set the display name. And again, I'm not prefacing something that's coming. I don't even know if that's coming. That's just my hope and desire that, trying to get ahead of this stuff, that how do we think with an approach that will keep working as more and more features come in Webflow? Because like, man, oh man, is it painful. Even like, one of my biggest projects this past year was all done before the collections were here. And I have so much temptation to take like a day and do nothing else but remap all of these, right? But like, at least the variables are there, and at least it's a step in the direction that the product's going to keep going. So anyways, I digress. Hopefully that's helpful in some of this context, especially working with clients, how they think about this, how it works with CMS. Sorry, actually, one other tiny thing I would say about CMS is that my thinking that has changed slightly with this is that before, in fact, for Webflow and for a couple of freelance clients, I have built these like complex, entirely CMS-based approaches to be able to set basic sections like this, rearrange them via multi-reference fields, alter content. And every single time I've spent weeks building those and then written weeks more of documentation, the client or our team member hardly uses it because it's just too intimidating, or it takes time to learn. And so I think this is where this approach is going to be massive, is that when they need things like this, they need a simple landing page. Honestly, it's probably not ever going to be this much content. It'll be like, a CTA, maybe not even a footer, and they just need to spin it up quick, have it specific for their need, publish and go. But have it be customizable more than you could do in the CMS. That is what this is for. The CMS will always still be the solution for things like programmatic SEO, right? Like I want thousands of pages generated to, pump some SEO power into my site, or I have a blog and the layout doesn't need to change from one page to the other. It's just content that's changing. Like that is the purpose of the CMS, right? And especially the bigger sense of like the fact that the CMS has such a powerful API that you can extend that way. So anyways, I do need to be conscious of time too, because I have to bounce at 30, but I can hang for like 10 more minutes. So yeah, any other questions?
Patrick, go ahead.
Is there a reason in the responsive collection you don't use the size variables that you have in the other collection for like all the font sizes and paragraph? Like I know some of them are going to be custom, like H2 3.8 in the base mode. You don't have a size variable for that, but like I do see that you're using them in padding, but not in any of the font sizes, even if there is one. This is always like in every framework that uses, a dedicated size variable section. I'm always like on the fence. Like, do I drop in a variable and do 1.5 RAM, or do I just type in 1.5 RAM, right? Like, that's why,
Dude, this, and such a good question. I had a couple of people ask this as well. I would say, there isn't a lot of thinking behind these values other than like, this is what I had them at before. And absolutely to your point, like there's no reason this couldn't be 5.5 right here. Totally. And then I honestly was still on the fence of like even having the size collection. The reason I kept it is if you are familiar with working this way, I do still like the idea of this being, I think at least one of the strategies people use this is that it forces you to stay within the like 4 or 8 pixel grid design thinking, right? Like that's one of those designer nerd out things of like, everything is a multiple of 4. Isn't it a magical thing? And I'm like, yeah, it is pretty dope. And so like, if I'm, the example in those cases is like, if I'm building some custom card or something, cool card, always name your classes, folks. And, instead of setting a random value, I'll just set like, like that. And I know automatically it's a multiple. I don't have to think about it. And then, so that's one side of it that absolutely, even to this point, all of these could be set with those out of the box. But I think the bigger thing I wanted to also make, or that crossed my mind briefly with this is I don't want people to be new and use this and assume that's the only way you can set font sizes, because it is 1000% not, because the far greater reality is that you've been given a design that has some arbitrary 62.13 pixel H1. And if it's not that, the designer is going to cry. Then cool, put it in as that. You don't need a variable bound for that specific value, but like, that's so silly. However, as more of the developer first thinking, if you do want to bind all these, the thing I was trying to pull up was not the epic app that Tim just dropped. But is it this? He has this like separate site where you can it's basically not just doing typography like this new app, but you actually have all of the base sizes that it will generate the fluid responsive CSS for. And then the thinking is, as long as you bind every single value to these base variables, so again, like all of these would be bound to those. All of these would be bound to those. Everything is bound to them. Then you have this base chunk of CSS that is clamping every single one of these values. So that way, no matter where you use it, custom class or not, fluid responsive is running. And so that was the other thinking I had in the back of my mind about keeping these, was like, I still think it'd be rad to just show a video of like how you could consume fluid responsive in here. Especially like even to Corey's question of the Flexbox modes, right? Like it's one of those things where I can't emphasize enough how, in my opinion, you can have a preference of starting places, but if you don't go to the extent of at least learning the strategies and ways that Lumos versus Mast versus client first think about things, then I think you're selling yourself short on being able to intermix them. You know what I mean? Or even the example I know I've talked about in the past was like, if you like using Reloom, but you want to use Mast, do it, yo. Like build all the basic boring stuff, sections and containers with Mast, and then go get a fancy nav from Reloom and just like maybe update the class names, if that, right? Or swap out the container for the like 3 layers of client first divs and classes to create a container, right? Like there is no reason you can't intermix. You know what I mean? Hopefully that makes sense as far as those existing. Cool.
I just have one more super quick question.
Let's go.
Column without any combo classes, is there a reason why it has 100% max width only on mobile?
Wait, sorry. Just the base call?
Base call, no combo classes, and then because regular combo classes will give a max width, but then like call has no max width. Until you get to mobile, and then it's at 100%.
Yes. Great question. And I feel like we talked about this in Twitter DMs a while back. I think this is actually left over. And so like open to feedback here if this shouldn't be this way. I want to say this is left over from Kevin. I can't think of his last name, was the person who originally rebuilt the Bootstrap layout system in Webflow in like 2017 is where I first found it, and then started using it in just before Mast ever had a name. And I want to say this was left over from that. And it was making the assumption that like a column never could be more than 100% only on mobile. But even when I say that out loud, I'm like, well, that should apply to every breakpoint, right? So yeah, I don't know.
Like, it caught me off guard where I was like, everything was like, but it was, again, it was for like a very specific layout. So it's like, maybe that should have been a custom component. In the first place, right? A custom class in the first place. Okay, cool.
Because I want to even say that it's somehow tied to like Bootstrap made the assumption that every column would stack on mobile. You would rarely put things side by side, but I would definitely argue that's not the case. I mean, my gosh, right here is an example where that's not the case, right? So great call out. Anyways.
All right. Wow.
Sweet.
Okay, so, yay. I think it's really good that when you go to YouTube, you can actually change the speed on on a replay, because some of this you might want to go back and listen to it on one bit slower just to kind of catch all the words. Anyway,
thank you. I couldn't agree more.
But thank you for just motoring through that and giving us so much great information so that we can, sort of get into using Mast and doing more with it. And I think, more videos would really help. I miss the videos on Webflow with the new, all the new components. I have no clue. So I don't even try to use them because I can't read the words and make sense. So
totes.
That along. Anyway, I want to say thank you to everybody who joined us today.
Yeah, thanks,
everybody who joined us on YouTube. We had a lot of folks there as well. And I really, really, really want to say thank you to Corey for coming and sharing Mast with us and helping us do more with it. So
yeah, appreciate
otherwise, we are back next week. Actually, we're not back live on YouTube, but we are in our lodge space with a little Valentine's hangout. So come hang out with us and share the love. And on Friday the 21st, we have a Northern Showcase with Jamie Wendell from Kula in outside of Vancouver, and we're having a tax workshop for Canadians. Sorry, folks, those of you who aren't Canadian. I don't know if you really want to talk about HST and GST and all of that stuff, but we're having a tax workshop to help folks sort of understand that side of the business world. So thanks all so much for
awesome.
coming, and we will see you all real soon. Take care.